organizations, both non-for-profit and for-profit here in Chicagoland. And they've ranged from doing production, operations, presenting and producing events, festivals, competitions, all sorts of different events, to working in fundraising and patron development, and to doing community engagement. And I did a lot of education work. I was the director of operations at the New Music School. I was the director of the music department at the School of Performing Arts in Naperville. I was also the program director for the education organization, which I think is now called the Foundations of Music, but back then it was called Rock for Kids. Just a little throwback for anybody who remembers all the way back then. So I've done a lot of different development work across these organizations, including grant writing, solicitation, board development, and fundraising in general, soliciting funds from major donors. And really my big takeaway from everything that I've ever done is it's all about relationships. So that's going to be a theme that we talk about a lot today in writing your grant proposal, is how do you develop relationships and get your relatable ideas across as well, for you to become more relatable to the grantor, excuse me. So that's a little bit about me. I'll just quickly go over what we're going to talk about today. So we'll do about a 30-minute presentation, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions afterwards. I will do my best to answer all of your questions, either about the specific grants. I did go over the social justice seed grant in quite some detail, so I hope I can answer some questions in more detail about that one, but also more general stuff about anything we talk about today. If you have an immediate question, you're welcome to, I don't know if we're doing hand raising here, or maybe throw it in the chat and we can address it while we are talking about it. So we're going to talk about research and eligibility for your grant, formulating your need statement, your objectives or your goals, and your methods and how you're going to get them done, how to create strong arguments, building your outline. So that's more like the nitty gritty. How do you build an outline that serves your purpose and doesn't overwhelm you or the reader? And then writing your draft and reviewing. So let's just kind of jump in. So first we'll talk about research and eligibility. So before you start any grant application, you must really fit in with their funding priorities. And you have to do quite a bit of research, I think, before you even start. You want to know about your grantor. Who are they and what are they passionate about? What are the types of things that they like to fund? What are the types of things that they think are important? So what are some of the main points or issues that the deciding committee will use to make the decision on who will be funded? And then you will focus on which of those things resonate most strongly with your project. So for example, from the RFP or from the application from the Social Justice Seed Grant, they say specifically, how will you employ the performing arts in attempting to address a social justice issue? So that's right off the bat, an overarching theme that they want to know about, that you and your project must resonate with them. And then we want to research the grantor. So we want to know what are the other types of projects they have funded before? What are they passionate about? And how does their mission statement align with what you intend to do? Knowing what their mission statement is and what they really care about, it can really help to focus what you write about. Hopefully that will, help their decision making in choosing your project. So of course, check your eligibility. They usually have right at the top very specific guidelines. I think for this specific grant, they say, you have to be a current student, so on and so forth. So make sure that you tick all those boxes first and foremost. If you have a question about something, I think it's a great question. It's a great time to ask. Use it as an opportunity to make a personal connection with the grantor. Any opportunity that you can find, and this goes back to our relationship theme, to establish a relationship, a personal one with the grantor will only help you. And usually if you sit down, if you get a chance to like sit down with them or, on a Zoom call or a phone call or something like that, and it's old school to have a phone call these days, but usually you will have an organic conversation where you can talk more in depth about your idea and your project. And they might even give you some tips, might give you some really interesting feedback. Like, I really love this element, but I think this element doesn't really fit in with what we do here. Um, Either way, it's always a good thing because as you spend more time in the grant writing field, you'll learn that even if the specific project you're pitching today doesn't fit in with them and they're not going to fund you, that doesn't mean another project in the future wouldn't be a great fit. And so if you have that personal relationship with them, it can really boost your chances in the future of connecting with them and getting the grant later on. So I think it's super important to read through the entire grant application before you start. You'd be surprised, a lot of people don't do this. You want to have a very broad overview of all the types of questions they're going to ask before you even start writing your outline, because there might be something all the way at the end. Say you spent hours and hours, thinking and working on this project, and then you get to a question all the way at the end and you're like, oh, I don't have anything for this. I'm totally stuck. So read the whole thing all the way through, and you'll want to isolate and identify specific points and questions which first must be decided before you can even begin writing. So this is, I think, really important. This is a big time saver. You don't just want to dive in, start writing, and then later, get totally stuck. So this we'll revisit this when we get to our outline too. So you want to formulate your main points. In your abstract, this is, as it says in the RFP, this is your elevator pitch, both from you to the committee and also for the school to potential external partners and organizations. So I suggest that you write this only after completing your narrative. So only after, at the very end, will you go back and look at everything you've written, your entire grant, and you'll cherry pick key phrases and key points. So take everything you have, boil it down into a few key phrases and make your elevator pitch that way. I have found it's the most time efficient way to make it instead of the opposite. And so your narrative is where you will flush out all of your ideas in great detail. And they will need to tie together the following 4 things: your need statement, your goals and objectives, the methods on how you will achieve the goals and objectives, and your budget. So for example, if your need statement, I made up a little scenario through the rest of the presentation here on a little fake project I created. If your need statement gives evidence that there is a need in the community for music education in K-12 public schools, your goals and objectives should be to increase music education in K-12 schools. Your methods or the activities in your program must seem likely to produce those effects. And the budget must contain all the components to carry out your program. So that's how they all fit together. And that's how the deciding committee will essentially judge your proposal. So we'll go into further detail into these topics next. So your need statement. Before you start writing, I suggest you use your research to inform your need statement. You can use statistics to show the seriousness of your program in your statement. I find this to be really helpful because it shows the grantor that you are informed, that you are an expert in your field, you are someone to be trusted on this topic. So my little scenario here is there is a strong need for high quality music education in CPS. Only 50% of all CPS schools even offer a music program. That's not a real statistic, I just made it up, but that's the example, right? So obviously there is a need. Half the schools, according to me, don't even offer music. So what are we going to do about it, for example? So, and this also will go back and tie into the research that you're doing on your grantors. Sometimes when you are combing through their website and you're looking at all the stuff that they do and that they fund, and you read their language, some of them are very into stats and numbers, and they really want evaluation tools and methods. Some of them are not. Some of them are like really feeling based funders. So you will need to get that pulse, and that's what the research on the funder, that first thing is, because that will help guide how you will cater and write your grant so that it appeals to them. So in your goals and objectives, how would you address the needs in your need statement? I think it's also, this is a good place to use percentages, if possible, to show how much you're planning to produce results. I understand, because I read in the RFP for the seed grant, that you might not be at a place where you can, you might not have formulated your project enough so that you can say exactly what goals are and what in your anticipated outcomes in terms of percentages, and that's fine. This is just a suggestion. So my sample goals and objectives is, the X program aims to provide quality, no-cost music education programs to 2 to 3 public schools through the course of the next 2 years. Our goal in that time frame is to increase the number of students in each school participating in a music program from 0 to 10%. So it gives a very tangible goal, gives you a timeline, and it tells them how many schools you're anticipating on working in, all in one short phrase. Of course, you could also just cut it off here at program. Our goal in this time frame is to increase the number of students in each school participating in the music program, period. If you don't feel comfortable setting a specific metric for yourself in your program quite yet, that's also totally fine. It depends where you are in the process, and it depends on what you think the funder is going to be looking for. So methods and budget. I love budgets. Methods are the activities in your program that you will enact to meet your goals. So for example, the X program intends on hiring professional teaching artists to provide after-school music education programming. They will do this through a general music class, a songwriting course, a whatever you have for your program ideas, reaching X number of students each week. So say, you're going to have 3 classes a week at 3 schools, and each class has 10 kids in it. There's your number. That's your estimate, if you think that is actually feasible. So those are your methods. How are you going to do it? And again, you can be as specific or not as specific as you are able to be according to where you are in your project planning. So your budget will need to address within a reasonable amount, requested amount, all the expenses relating to the activities needed to meet your objectives. So this would include the dollar amounts for staff payment, materials, travel, curriculum development, marketing costs. These are all just some things that I threw together, that I know are some basic expenses for a music education program. You can optionally have an area for income that you anticipate receiving. And I have a sample budget later on in the presentation that we'll go through too. This is not a requirement. A lot of times grantors may have a sample, like a template budget, and they will require you to put in income that includes what you're requesting from this grantor and other sources of income as well. And this is because they might want to see that you have a balanced budget at the end of it. Not everybody requests this. It's not a requirement. So some budgets are just expenses. But most importantly, whatever you put in your budget should match exactly what is proposed in your narrative. And you should use the same language as well. So if you say you're going to have 3 schools in your narrative, but your budget only reflects 1, not great. Okay, so let's move on to my little budget example for my pretend program. So just some housekeeping things. Unless instructed, specifically, I would save and upload your budget as a PDF. Don't send them an Excel sheet or something that they can edit. Also, you just never know what type of device people are looking at anything on, and what they might have available, what apps they have. So it's just best to go with the PDF because everybody can see that. So notes are not required, but they are helpful, especially if your numbers are estimates, which it kind of sounds like in this situation, a lot of your numbers might be estimates. So they also give you an opportunity to explain how you acquired these numbers from your narrative. So here I have the CAL organization, and this is my budget for the Performing Social Justice Student Seed Grant. So I have two categories. I have expenses and I have my income down here. And then I have divided up into subcategories, different things here. So I have my TAs, administration. So that's program management. That's my time for implementing and creating the program. Curriculum development. So say you have, a music ed major friend who has agreed to spend a couple hours a week for a few weeks helping build the curriculum for your music program. You'll want to pay them X amount. And then development. So maybe you have someone, a friend who works in retail or something that wants more sales or experience, and they're willing to help try to solicit some donations for you. And then you have your marketing. I always put that in a separate category, even though it's only one line item. Seems silly, but I like the way it looks visually. And then our transportation and materials. So transportation to and from school sites, assuming you would be going to school sites at all. And equipment. So maybe you have to buy a couple keyboards for each school, musical instruments, so on and so forth. I like to take these subcategories and write the subtotals instead of just listing all of them and making a grand total. And I like to do this so that the grantor can see exactly how much you're going to spend or you anticipate on spending on each of these categories. That helps them, I think, feel a little bit more reassured as to the planning that you're putting into this program, that they're not giving you a big lump sum and then who knows what you're spending it on. It's clear you're going to spend this much on marketing, I'm going to spend this much on personnel, so on and so forth. Now for the income, you can see I put the seed grant, and in the notes I just put amount requested in this proposal, and then some anticipated donors. Now again, the income is not usually a requirement. You can just leave it at expenses. Anyway, so I have a little link to this budget. I think that you guys will get this PowerPoint afterwards. I don't know, and maybe Emily, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Happy to send it out, but you guys are happy to use this template as well. You're welcome to use it. Any questions about budget? It's a big daunting thing. I feel like we can definitely spend a lot of time on it because it's a scary thing, but I feel like when it's broken down like this and you see the different categories and you're allowed to have estimates, and that's okay, or you're allowed to take something out, it becomes a little less daunting. I might suggest actually, and I often do this when I'm creating a new program from scratch, to start with your budget. Just build the program in your mind looking at this. Because it might give you an idea, because you might, be like, oh, I want to serve 10 schools. And then you add up all those personnel and equipment expenses, and you're like, well, 10 schools is not going to work. That is extremely expensive. There's no way I'm even going to get 10 schools, for example. So then you would start to scale it down, and that would be all based on the budget. So that's how I prefer, in my experience, to create programs, but other people are not like that. So it just depends upon your style. Okay, so priority 3 is writing a persuasive argument. So we've touched on a number of these topics, a number of the topics that create a persuasive argument, such as doing the research, knowing what your grantor is passionate about, for example. So the key points here is that your job is to convince the reader that your project matches with their passions, that it is deserving to be funded, and I hate to get competitive here, but even more so than other competing project proposals. Let's just be clear. You want to get your project funded. So a useful tool that I have learned over the years is using the grantor's language. We want to echo words, phrases, and expressions from the request for proposal, and also from the website. Any of the materials that you have come across in your research, all the way back in priority 1, this is a good place to find it, because you'll get an idea of like whether they are, like I might have mentioned before, a very emotionally driven organization, or are they very data and evidence and evaluation driven funder. So you'll get that feel in your research, but you'll want to use their words. Like, for example, if they are a funder that specifically gives money for music education, and they don't refer to the participants as students, they always refer to them as like Chicago's youth, or budding artists, or whatever that might be. Feel free to echo their language. I think that can show them, one, that you did your research. They can tell that you then read their materials and that that's important to you. It's very important. And then 2, that yeah, you're listening to them, and you also value what they value. So we'll talk a little bit about the logical and the emotional appeal. So using both a logical and an emotional appeal will make you and your organization or your project feel more trustworthy. So trust in relationship is another key point here. You want the grantor to feel like they can trust you with their funds, right? Both through the methods that you're choosing, but also just you as a person. Can you be trusted with these funds? So logical appeal elements will include data, stats, facts, percentages. So everything like we talked about in the goals and objectives and the need statement, for example, a very logical appeal. Emotional appeal elements will include relatable stories, phrases, imagery. So like we said, referring to students as young artists or Chicago's future. So also, what's your story? Why do you feel passionate about this project? Why did you come up with this idea? Why is it important to you? And you can really make yourself and your program relatable through the emotional appeal. So you want a nice balance of both. And again, what that balance is, you'll have to use your judgment based on what you think the grantor is going to respond to most. So building your outline, I do love building a good outline. It's so satisfying when you got everything clearly laid out and you're like, I have direction. I always build my outlines based on your most important points. So you have your budget, you have very important points, things you cannot do without. You have your requirements and your eligibility based on the grant. And you have all the questions that they're asking, right? They ask very specific questions, things that you must answer. Most grants will have a word or paragraph limit, so you don't really want to waste a whole lot of time writing about stuff that you're going to cut anyway. So make sure that you always keep an eye out on those word limits. Some of them have character limits, so that's fun. I typically would suggest to not say the same thing twice unless you have a very good reason to. One, there's just usually not enough space. There's not enough time. Unless it is a part of your specific sales pitch would I recommend you saying the same thing twice, but usually it's just not needed, right? They get it. They're reading carefully, they're taking notes. You don't have to hammer them over the head with an idea or a concept. So the most important points from your whole narrative will be cherry picked to write your abstract, as we talked about. So in terms of how to actually write your outline, something that I like to do when I'm writing grants is I take all the really high priority questions that the funder has specifically requested that you answer, and I list them at the top of my outline. And I'll show you an example because I have an example here. Like, but I go back to like thinking about it as if it's a 5th grade assignment. They are asking a specific question and there is a specific answer to it. And at the end of the day, you just have to answer all the questions. You know, it is so easy to go off on a tangent and talk about the program and how great the program is, and, you know, to really get lost in it. And then all of a sudden you have run out of space and you don't even realize that you're saying so much that you've actually left out specific things the funder asked you to address. So this helps me not lose those points. So I go to the next slide here. This is my outline for this exact presentation that we're looking at now. And what I did is, this is what I always do. I list at the top and I highlighted, these are the important things that I have to talk about. So I actually went through the social justice seed grant and I picked out from each question what I thought were some of the most important things that they were asking. And then as I write in my outline, once I hit on one of the topics, I strike it out. So I have talked about this. I have already discussed possible partner organizations and audiences for this project. So I know I don't have to talk about that again. But maybe I talked about it in a section that it really shouldn't be, because way later on, you know, maybe I talked about it in question 3, but it actually should be in question 5. And then I can just move it instead of talking about it twice, for example. I also, this method works well for me because I can also, if I'm in Google Docs or I guess in Word too, you can make comments. So I might highlight it and say, I have a venue ideas, rep, and other programmatic elements, but no dates. So just write little notes for myself. So when it's time to expand on those things, I have a little refresher as to what I already have so far. So again, this is so that to ensure that you've touched on everything that they've asked you to. You'd be surprised that sometimes people don't actually address things that the grantor wants you to address. So boil it down, really just on the most elementary level, make sure you answer the questions that you're being asked. Okay, so building your draft and reviewing. So some of my key takeaways are to tell your story, make it personable, make it relatable. I will always reread as though I were a different person. So, you know, we're all musicians or artists in some way, so we know what it's like when you are practicing and you record yourself and then you go out and you take a break and you come back and you listen to the recording and it's like, whoa, okay, what was that? Don't know what that was. I don't know all what I thought it sounded like. Same thing totally happens with grants. So I like to put on a fresh perspective. If I'm talking about music education, I imagine that I'm a board member at some funder and I work at like Allstate or something, and I have no clue about music education whatsoever. Would I understand this? Do I get the point? Am I compelled by it? So do you feel moved after reading your draft? That's the emotional component. Do you ever say the same thing twice? If so, why? Do you have a good reason to? Are you using their language? Are you being clear, concise, and educational? So that's your logical component. So like I mentioned before, not all funders are artists themselves. And so you might know a little bit more about this if you manage to have a personal conversation with them in the eligibility section, for example. And does your narrative clearly and directly reflect what's in your budget? So final housekeeping things, uh, really basic. If you're writing an abstract or your narrative or your budget in separate documents, make sure they're all uniform. They should all have the same heading, same font size. Your language should be uniform across all documents. So whatever you use to describe your teaching artists in the narrative should also be what's in your notes section of the budget. Do you call them TAs? Do you call them teaching artists? Do you call them teachers? That stuff matters. It does, because it shows your attention to detail, which hopefully means that your attention to detail will mean that your program will be successful because you are a detailed oriented person that wants to be successful. Our label each document with your name, the date, grant title, for example. None of this applies, of course, if it's just like some sort of form or something online that you just type in and you copy and paste your text into, but not all grants are like that. Make sure you use correct grammar, punctuation, and spelling. This is also pretty important. Grammarly is a really cool, very good free tool for proofreading your work and your grammar and your spelling. Also, use a thesaurus. I love using my thesaurus. I just go to thesaurus.com. I can't tell you how many times like I've read through grant requests that just use like, I put the word unique in here specifically because yes, it's a great word. It can be overused. So if you have found yourself saying the word unique 10 times in your grant proposal, try to find a different word. But in general, avoid using bland general words. You want to have good, very descriptive language because you don't have too much space. So you have to be concise and you have to be efficient with the space you have. So unless other specifically asked, save everything as a PDF is my other general rule. Peer review. So have a friend, a colleague, or a family member read your proposal before submitting it. So that means you can't leave it until the last minute. You need to have it done at least a week before so you can proof it, you can send it out. People have time, they're busy, they can read it and send it back to you. I mean, again, all of us in the arts, we know it's important to have people listen to you and to look at your work before your performance. And feedback can hurt because you love this piece, you love your program and you love your grant and you spend a lot of time on it, but that feedback is really important. So ask them specific questions. Was it compelling? Do you get my point? Ask them to look for specific things that the grant request has asked for and see if they got it. And of course, use any opportunity to speak directly to someone from the funding institution. Again, build that relationship. Yeah, so that's it. I guess we'll open it up for some questions. I put my contact information here, so if you guys have questions later or you want to reach out for any other reason, I'm here and happy to talk and give feedback. But I guess now we'll open it up for some questions.
Hi, thank you for all of that information. It's very, very informative. And I was laughing when you mentioned that budgets were your favorite because I've always been really scared of them. So I was wondering, what do you base the numbers off of when you're deciding how much the TAs are going to get paid and how much transportation is? And
Right.
do you try to shoot over or maybe round down? I've never really known how to
Mm.
make those decisions.
No, that's a really good question. I guess to answer the second part first, I would generally go a little bit over. Um, it's always better to come in, under budget than to go over. So yeah, I would definitely go there. If you're trying to find out how much, to pay a teaching artist, for example, I would do research by asking. Do you have any friends or colleagues that are working as teaching artists or working in schools somewhere. Or you could even start, it's not really the exact equivalent, but you could say, you know, what's the hourly rate for someone that's giving even a private lesson? And you can kind of start from there. But I would just kind of ask around first, throughout your network, and see if you can get some ideas. People are more open to talking about money than they used to be. So I don't think it's like a faux pas thing as so much as it used to be before. But like transportation, you know, most people just kind of ballpark, you know, how much gas they would spend driving to and from a school that's approximately 5 miles from your house twice a week. And then multiply that by every teacher that you have. Um, you know, marketing costs, you could pretty quickly, if you're going to be doing some printing stuff, you can just price that out at like FedEx Kinko's or something like that. So you can just call and say, I have a printing project and I need 100 brochures and get some quotes, you know, call around a couple other places and then average them out. So it takes a little bit of work. You have to do that research. Once you get into the flow of it and you've done a couple of these, you can just kind of be like, that'll be $500. That'll be about 1,000, you know, and you get pretty good at it. But at first it just takes some research, but it's good research for someone that's planning a brand new project to do, because you're going to have to go and do all that stuff anyway. Yeah, that's a really good question.
I can ask one. When you build a relationship with a grantor, if your grant isn't given the funding, can you still go back to that person that you built a relationship with and ask them about other opportunities? Is that faux pas, or is that totally open?
That's a great idea. And you know, yes, you can definitely do that, because they know their programs in and out. That's what they do. They're in charge of, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7 different kinds of programs, and then you know, they collect the different grant proposals for them, and they're in charge of all that. So absolutely, that's a really good thing to do. Also, if you have a good relationship with the grantor and you do not get the grant, I would follow up and say, you know, thank you so much for this opportunity. Always send a nice thank you note. And also ask if they would be willing to sit down with you and discuss why you didn't get funded. That is 100% reasonable. Everybody does it. Very, very common thing to do. And it also just keeps you guys in conversation, because that's what you want for the next time. Yeah, good question. I think was there someone else who had a question? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Davina. I actually just stumbled upon this event about 2 hours ago.
Oh.
So it's, I don't have anything active that I'm working on, but I'm looking for hopefully later this year. So that's my question actually. Having no experience at running a project other than, work projects, how do I build that trust?
How do you build the trust with the grantor that you will execute the program well? Is that okay? Yeah. I mean, I think you would just have to be convincing in your arguments and have a really good plan. I think having a really nice plan, these are my detailed methods, using the example of the teaching artist that I had, for example, like these are the teachers I plan on using even, you know, I have them lined up already. So it's if you really want to gain their trust in that way, I would suggest having a very well thought out program with all those details ready to go. So they could be like, yes, this will happen if we give them funds and it will happen as they said it will happen. One thing I did not talk about in here that is often asked in grant requests and is often asked afterwards, after your program too, is evaluation. And I didn't touch on it because it wasn't a part of this specific social justice seed grant proposal. But a lot of times grantors will ask about your evaluation methods. And you will have to have a pretty, as much as you can, robust plan to say, how will you make sure that you will do what you say you want to do? How will you make sure that your teaching artists are indeed teaching the curriculum? How will you ensure you will reach that 10% of students? And what's your evaluation of your program? So you can also kind of throw that in there as bonus if they don't request it, and that will help them gain some trust in you.
Okay, so the benchmarks, the milestones I plan to reach, and as well as the evaluation.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot, but and again, if you're concerned that it's your first time grantee, and you can discuss with that grantor, with the grant manager, and say, I haven't received funds from you all before, and this is the first time we're launching this project, and we're really excited about it. But so what are some things that you all would like to see from me and to see from the program? So be open to their suggestions too. I think would also help to build trust.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah.
We're just about out of time, so if anybody has any further questions, just shoot a message in the chat, or I have put Rhapsody's email in there, as well as a short feedback survey. Please, please, please fill it out for us. We'd really appreciate it. All right.